Electric Cafe.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Electric Cafe. Today's video is an EP review on Martinou, the Swedish producer, his new EP. It's a double pack, 6 tracks in all, called LinkedIn, which will be coming out on Studio Barnhus Records out of Sweden. Um, I'm actually surrounded by some of my some Swedish techno. I've been a huge Swedish techno fan for a long time and supporter of labels and the artists that came out of there. A couple of my favorite labels currently in the last handful of years has been Studio Barnhus and also Northern Electronics. And it makes sense. I first got a chance to hear Martinou's uh, first 2 albums back in 2021 and 2023 called Rift and also Chiral. And I was really impressed by his melodic sense and also just the combination he has of strong techno and a balance of deep house and also techno. And when I found out his new EP was coming out and it was on Studio Barnhus, I was really excited because I think it's a perfect marriage. Studio Barnhus is a label out of Sweden, Stockholm, founded in 2009. I first got a chance to check out the label in 2014 when I randomly bought an EP off the label, and then I've been following it ever since. And it's been a great home for a lot of strong techno producers. Everybody from Jasper Dahlback to Lawrence Guy, who's an excellent producer, HNNY, who sometimes I feel like I want to say Hinny, but I don't think that's pronounced that way. It's just the abbreviations HNNY. But also Alex Bowman, Baba Stilitz, and also one of my favorite producers of all time, who's not necessarily Swedish, if I don't think so, but Jimmy Tenor, the amazing Jimmy Tenor, is on this label as well. But a lot of fantastic electronic music on this label in the past 15 years is just full of excellent music, and I'll definitely put a link down below so you can check more from their label. Considering that this label is from Sweden, I wanted to take a moment, if you'll allow me to, and honor the lineage of great Swedish house and techno music. I've been a huge supporter of and huge fan of Swedish techno music since the early '90s. It all started back when I first heard Robert Lanier. His music under Source Experience, and his own name were just, amazing. I loved his blend of trance and techno in the early '90s, and also ambient music. Such a fantastic producer, just amazing. So it started with him, and then as you moved on to the early '90s, Kari Lukabush was one of my favorite. Obviously, his hybrid productions and the original hybrid label, so important for the time. Such a great techno producer he was. This album really put him on the map for me. And then you also had the Drum Code label. Adam Beyer, Ben Sims, Planet Rhythm Records. Just some amazing producers. I wanted to give a shout out to a few of them. Obviously, you can see the Svek label in back of me, Jesper Dahlback. His work under his own name, ADNY, The Persuader, Bromage Dub. I have a huge collection of Svek records. Was a big um, big fan of that label through the late '90s and early 2000s until that label unfortunately folded. But such a also DK7 had one of the most Jesper Dahlback had one of the biggest techno hits that year. I think this came out in 2002. The Difference. Just an amazing single. Also, of course, he did probably one of the most popular techno tracks of all time out of Sweden. What Time Is It, Mr. Templar? Under the Persuader name. Just an amazing tracks. I wanted to take a moment just to. I'm sure I'm going to leave out some names, but just wanted to mention some of my favorite techno producers out of Sweden all time. Robert Lanier, Joel Moll, Errol Bricka, Kari Lekabush, Jesper and John Dahlback, Seba, aka Form, Par Grinvik. Excuse me if I'm pronouncing some of these off. Abby Loneberg, Hardcell, David Rousseau, Henrik Johnson, Joel Alter, Henrik B., Tobias von Hufsten, Patrick Scood, Per Michael, Tobias Gronval, aka Unit 21, Anthony Linnell, Intergritty, aka Thomas Anderson, of course, Alexi Delano, excuse me, and Varg, just to name a few of them. Also, Studio Barnhouse has some great producers in their label from Sweden as well. Again, Lawrence Guy is one of my favorite producers, as well as in the last couple of years, Martinou is one of my favorite producers. But just a great lineage of Swedish techno and deep house. Um, I just wanted to take a moment to recognize some of those artists and some of those labels that were so important for the history of techno. Again, I think Sweden is one of the most underrated um, areas of techno and house music in the world, and it doesn't quite get the respect that it does. So I wanted to take a moment to give a shout out to all those producers who have been a huge inspiration to me, and I know a lot to. It meant a lot to a lot of others too. So definitely want to take a moment to thank them. And definitely, Studio Barnes is carrying on that tradition with their fantastic discography that they've been putting on. I'll definitely put a link below so you can check out more from their label. But yeah, let's get on to checking out Martinou's new EP. It's a 6-track EP, and you'll hear the tracks in their full. And then while they're playing, I'll give you my score of them, and then give you my overall thoughts at the end of the album. Hope that sounds good. So yeah, let's check out Martineau's new EP. since we're talking about Swedish techno and celebrating it here in this video, one release that I was really proud of that I was able to reissue on my label was from a was a rare EP that originally came out in Sweden called Clouds Over Europe, which is a here's the reissue copy right here. Originally, this came out in 1993, and it was a promo copy only, 100 copies. Never originally picked up by a label, unfortunately, and I got a chance to hear it, and then a couple years later, I got a chance in 2021 to contact the original artists, Unit 21, aka Tobias Gronfall, and then also Aquarium Atmosphere, and was able to contact them and get their approval on doing a reissue, and it became one of my most special releases on my label. Here's the insert here. It talks a little bit about the release, and you can see here it has an outline of Sweden in here. But one of the most important releases on my label for me personally, and it was really an honor being part of it. And when you're part of, or when you want to be part of the music scene and give back to it in some way, whether you're an artist or you're a DJ or you're a label owner, whatever it is, you kind of want to honor the music that got you into it. And I was such a huge supporter of Swedish techno through the years, and such a big fan of it that I wanted to honor something on my label from Sweden. And it all goes back to my oldest sister being she was an exchange student in Sweden in the middle '80s, and so I've always had I've always met a lot of great people from Sweden over the years, and I wanted to honor their lineage and their history of great music and put something from their country on my label. So I'll put a link down below just so if you'd like to check out some of the samples on here. But just a really good record, and it just shows you even in 1993 how good the techno was in Sweden, and it's carried on today by great labels like Studio Barnes. All right, so that was all 6 tracks on Martinou's latest EP called LinkedIn. Really enjoy this album. I got a chance to first hear this earlier this week, and now getting a chance to a little bit more in depth with them. I like them just the same, if not even more so. Definitely a really strong production on here, no doubt. Big melodies rising. You definitely kind of get that uplifting trance vibe in a lot of these tracks, and how how the melodies evolve and sort of have like a euphoria to them. Some are a little nostalgic, some are a little bit euphoric and sort of uplifting. But there's always a nice groove in here, whether it be a sort of an IDM groove or a more techno groove. Certainly a lot to get lost in, whether, depending on what you're focused in. And there's nice balance, even though the melodies are big and evolving and really beautiful. There's still an underlying kind of groove to the tracks where definitely kind of gritty and dubby, and really like a lot of the chord work and the multiple layering of the tracks. You Took Me In, the first track, definitely verging on trance with the progression, yet the rhythm is rooted in Detroit techno. Has a similar progression with the melody that reminded me of Humate's 3.1 track back in 1996. If you guys remember that track, the melody kind of reminded me of that, kind of a German trance track. And then Blur was my second favorite on the album. This one has a little bit more of an IDM beat, ominous melody. Love how the melody's sort of in the second part of the bar section. Really nice. Love the layers around the chords, melodic, and I love chill out music, so this one's right up my alley with a little bit more of a chill vibe in here, but just so good. I rated this one 8 3/4 stars. My second favorite track of the album, but my first is Somewhere. I love this track, and I must have played it for about 5 hours over the past couple days, just on repeat, because I just love how the melody just continues to climb and continues to come out. And if you listen to it multiple times, and every time you hear the percussion sort of raising in volume and raising in intensity as you're sort of paying attention to the melody rising, and it almost becomes a balance of what you want to listen to, and both come up subliminally in a way, and really get to the point where they continue to keep rising, and the percussion gets a little faster, the hi-hats around like 4 minutes, and just continues to rise through about 6 of the 7 minutes. Just a awesome track. And I love how it starts out like a deep minimal groove and then immediately goes into the layers like, oh, we're gonna go that way, huh? It's like, because you think it's a pretty, it's kind of one of the more darker grooves, maybe besides one of the later tracks, like This Is Not the End. That one's a deeper kind of groove. But somewhere, it's just such a warehouse kind of vibe at the beginning, warehouse groove. And then just all of a sudden just switches on, and oh, we're going to be a bright melody. And this is going to be a more positive song. I thought it was going to be a lot more darker. Kind of reminds me of Sasha Dive. And the the balance of here, it gives me kind of a German feel to it as well. But the really key about the track is the accents underneath with the percussion, and if you listen really closely, it's rising, and some parts seem to be going a little bit faster, and then they sort of go a little slower, and then faster as the melody continues to rise in intensity and volume. Just so subtle, so smooth. It reminds me of Yagya, his track from Will I Dream the Process called As If. If you guys remember that track back in 2006, which is one of my favorite Yagya tracks of all time, um, it reminds me of that as far as like the melody and everything like that. It's just beautiful. Awesome track. Love the rolling bass line too. Just amazing track. 9.5 stars out of 10. My favorite track on the record. And then between here and home, this one is my least liked track on the album, but I still think it's good. In between good and very good, actually, at a 6.5 score. I do think that the beats, the IDM beat is an interesting rhythm. Uh, it's always a classic rhythm to have sort of in my opinion, IDM beats sort of uh, rounded themselves, or they sort of morphed out of Detroit techno in some ways. They're kind of a broken beat, and sometimes they can really have a nice balance between the melody and the rhythm. And if you listen to the rhythm as an IDM rhythm, and then you hear the melody, they can really be offsetting to a really cool effect. You think of like Detroit techno, and a lot of the great IDM records of all time have had a great rhythm and a balanced melody. And here it definitely has that, and I really like the melody as well. But I do think the IDM beat is a little bit crunchy in here, and it almost sounds like banging on pots a little bit. So you know, and it can be a little bit loud at times. I wouldn't say it's abrasive at all, but it does get a little bit loud. But the great thing is the analog vibe, analog sound is really helps it pull through, and of course the melody is excellent as well. So I give it 6.5 stars. And then my third favorite track is the Light from Within. In counterpoint to that last track, I love the way this one does an IDM beat. It's a little bit more muted, a little bit more reserved, not so aggressive or crunchy. But and then this one, I love the really emotional melody rising in the back. But it's just a preference thing. You know what I mean? Like it's just a difference of preference of if you like a little bit more of the crunchier beats or if you like a little bit more of the muted beats. I think that's kind of the difference between Here and Home and Light from Within. But equally, both melodies are really good. But yeah, Light Within I gave 7.75 stars. And then This Is Not the End, the last track, another euphoric melody. 7.25 stars for this. This one's a little bit more straight techno in the groove, a little bit more dubby chords, deeper groove, kind of like Somewhere, like I was saying earlier with how it starts. You think it's going to be more of a minimal dubby track, but every one of these tracks, Martinou, just brings out a beautiful melody in these, and I can see how somebody sort of labeled this like a neo folk sound or a neo trance sound. I can definitely almost every track gives off a kind of a trance vibes with the melody, but there's such beautiful melodies. Even if you don't like trance, I think you would really like this record. But the tracks Somewhere and then Blur, I would buy this record just for those two tracks alone, let alone try to find if I like some of the other ones. The Blur and Somewhere are two tracks that I will definitely be keeping in my current playlist. And so yeah, when I think of the overall of this album, I give the album a 78 out of 100, right on the high side of very good, almost to excellent. It's right on the brink of the two, right on the edge. But I really appreciate Studio Barnhus for letting me review this album. Really excellent stuff. I'm becoming a big fan of Martinou and his music, and just the quality. I mean, believe this is his ninth or 10th or EP, and he has a couple albums out as well. Just consistent, good quality from him. Definitely a producer that you can buy on the spot without listening. Down below, I'll put a link towards the record label. So if you're interested in hearing more from this fantastic Swedish label, you can definitely check out more. And then also, if you'd like to purchase this on vinyl or digital, you'll see the link there below as well. So yeah, really appreciate Studio Barnes again for letting me review this album, and really think highly of this label and also this particular record. And I'm curious to know your thoughts on what you heard, and what are your favorite tracks from this record. All right, thanks so much for the support, and I will see you on the next video.